Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to the PRME Global Forum. My name is Dr. Wasim Abaza. I'm an assistant professor of social entrepreneurship at Zayed University in Dubai, and I'm the vice chair of the Prime Chapter MENA, working with Yaprak, who just spoke. We're going to start our first multi-stakeholder panel right now on collaboration and climate. Before we begin, I want to introduce our speakers on the panel. We have Ben Neville, Director of the Institute for Climate Futures at the University of Melbourne. P.D. Jose, Professor of the Indian Institute of Management at Bangalore. Thanyaporn Krichtitayawuth, I hope I said that correctly, Executive Director of the Global Compact Network, Thailand. And Paolo Galli, Professor, Università degli Studi di Milano Bicocca. Did I get that right? Bicocca, okay. Oh, I was close. So this panel is about climate and collaboration. The challenges presented by a greater expectation from society on manners of social responsibility and sustainability create an even greater imperative for collaboration. And this is especially important in the realm of climate because climate is literally global. And the challenges are so big that we require collaboration to tackle them. This is especially important for responsible business as they play a key role in collaborating to create new novel approaches to systemic issues. So on today's panel, we're going to be talking about collaboration specifically with regard to climate. So I'm going to start with PD. General question, why is a multi-stakeholder approach essential to progress?
Thank you, Wasim. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, great. So that's a really interesting question. And I think we've got to begin by understanding that climate change is not merely a technical problem. As we all know, it's multi-layered, multi-level, and it involves intergenerational equity. So, which means that it also involves public policy, economics, behavioral sciences, and all those dimensions put together. In some ways, as people have said, climate change is a wicked problem because we don't still have complete knowledge about the problem, or sometimes despite the scientific, certainty about climate change, there's still kind of contradictory research that's going on. There is significant amount of value conflict here. A number of people, different opinions, and mostly there is an interconnected nature of this problem with other problems, which means that like any wicked problem, often the solutions we propose create more problems. Add to all these scientific and economic complexities, some very deep uncertainties, some very divisive ethical issues, and lack of agreement on the exact nature of the problem or the solution. We have to also add the large economic burden, which means that no single stakeholder can effectively respond to these problems independent of others. And that's part of the nature of wicked problems. Individual action against, to resolve any problem in such a situation has very limited effectiveness. For any kind of solution to emerge, collaboration across, societies, across this, if you talk about a university, across disciplines, if you go beyond the university, across institutions, and if you go beyond institutions, across societies, is absolutely essential. So that's the first thing to remember. The second thing to remember is that any debate on climate change can be deeply divisive, and therefore conversations need to happen so that some consensus emerges. Let me give you a simple example. If you take the case of energy, now when we talk about energy, if you consider the data worldwide, about 1.2 billion people lack access to electricity, and about 2.8 billion people rely on you know uh, wood, charcoal, or coal, or other things for cooking. Now, all of this cause significant pollution. But when you talk about climate change in the case of energy, For higher income countries, it's mostly about mitigation efforts. Of course, they do account for a majority of the global emissions. But for countries that are less developed, the concerns are really not just about mitigation, it's about increasing the basic living standards. So clearly, while there needs to be, we need to contain global emissions, but we also know that, developing countries will need increased use of energy to grow and improve their living standards. And then the question, of course, is it's just not a question of improved efficiency; it's a question of access. So that's where the tough questions come. What will be the cost of containing these? Who will pay for them? And how should these costs be shared when the benefits are global and probably realized in the long term, whereas the costs are in the short term? So this is where conversations need to happen, collaboration needs to happen between, researchers, between public policy analysts, governments, non-governmental organizations, and so on, because policies that focus on a single aspect is simply not enough. One last example, and I want to stop with this. So if you talk about energy and you say let's do carbon pricing, it's simply not going to be effective unless we put complementary policies on land use, on trade policies that will reduce barriers to low carbon technology diffusion, give access to other countries to technology, make investments in R&D, and all of those. And all of these really require multiple stakeholders to come together. And unless they come together, we would simply be discussing but not really arriving at any acceptable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, PD. Thanyaporn, same question. Why is a multi-stakeholder approach essential to progress?
Yeah, thank you. Is my voice clear? I'm glad that today we all have a lot of good side-by-side together work with Prime College. And of course, when we talk about the business, from the Global Compact Network, in each country, we have drive the objective to be a business who are driven the carbon neutrality. And the collaboration with the multi-stakeholder approach would help. We can drive more on the connection, collaboration approach on climate change. It's a big topic that we had already discussed over the 5 years. And you can also refer for a lot of example. We're gonna talk very soon about how could we engage the youth focused activity as well, not only from the level of the senior management, but the business leader, like the youth, we focus on them because they are the leaders of tomorrow. And we could also develop how can we embed the curriculum on the current business situation to reflect the sustainability issue, to prepare them for the road ahead. And we had a lot of good positive feedback around the world about how can the business work together with prime school and students, that there are many good examples to bring the case study and reports. I believe the multi-stakeholders, including youth, are very important.
Very nice. I like that you included the youth, right? Because they're the ones that are going to be most impacted by climate change. Paulo, same question. Yeah. Why multi-stakeholder approach? Why is that essential?
But it's important to have every people involved in the project, and I can give you some example of what we do, what I'm trying to do in the Maldives. I'm a director of a marine research center in the Maldives, and we don't work just only in to investigate biodiversity and corals, and that of course is our target. But what we do is, for instance, to work all together with the population. Is it possible to share the presentation now or later? Okay. Just wanted to give you an example of what I'm trying to do in the Maldives, and how we try to put together any kind of skills, any kind of people. If we think about when we think about Maldives, we think about hotels, resorts, and environment, pristine area. No, just only we think, for instance, here we have some of the best resort probably in the world, $50,000 for day, special price, some crazy things like that. But it's not. This is just only part of the Maldives, because the Maldives are also something different because we have 900 pristine area without any people living in the islands. We have more or less 160 islands with resorts inside, and we have more or less 200 islands just only with local population. And I want to speak today about this kind of islands. And what we are trying to do in this place, that where we have our center, that is high-tech technology labs, and we have any kind of facilities in this place. And we have, of course, any kind of facilities also linked with the community. Everything that we do is related, is done together with the local people. In our island is 700 meters long, lives 800 people, and arrive any kind of researchers or students from any part of the world. Why? Because first of all, is an open source. Any kind of people can come and to study. And how is possible to do this? Because when I started this project in 2006, several years ago, we signed an agreement with the government. So we have agreement at the government level. We have agreement with local level. So everything that we do is completely is perfect because we have agreement with any kind of institution. Here, when we started the project, all the local community has been involved in this project. All together, we decide to realize this project. And just only to give you an example of the problem that the people have in this place, in these islands. We have problem with the water. They don't have drinkable water. They can take, at the moment, just only rainwater. They have problem with the waste. They burn any kind of waste that they produce. They have started to produce agriculture. They have started to do farms, chicken farm, any kind of so they have a lot of problems. And so what I tell you some only one thing that we are doing now is that in any island they have a council, okay, and in this council there are more or less 6 people that try to take care of the islands, but they don't have any kind of knowledge. They don't know more or less nothing about environment. They don't know nothing about waste. They don't know nothing about a lot of things. So, for instance, a new project that we are trying to do together now is related with how to teach at the people working in the council how to manage their islands. So we realized a project together with University of Dubai and with the support of UNDP, and this webinar and 888 better islands. And then with the idea is that what can we do? We can teach also at the local people. We can teach also at the council people. And then in this way, we can change maybe something related with climate change and with anything. This is the program, of course, just only to give you some idea. And nothing. This is just only an idea that what is possible to do together. The climate change is a big issue. We have a lot of problems, but what can we do? Of course, we have to, as a scientist, we have to produce data, we have to produce knowledge, but we have also to share our knowledge with any kind of people. And maybe the best thing that we can do is to share with any kind of people. In this case, just only with the council of the local islands. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. That's really amazing, and I'm already my mind is churning now on all the, I just want to go visit now. I want to go visit and see and learn from how that works. I mean, that's great, and I like how it's you mentioned open source, that it's open to anybody to come to study, to learn from. I think that's a really key point that you make. And you sort of answered question number 2 that I have, where everybody gets to show off a little what you're doing. So I'm going to start with Ben. So Ben, what form of collaboration are you and your institution engaging in to address climate change?
Yeah, thanks, Wasim, and hi to everyone. Unfortunately, we're not setting up in the Maldives like Paolo, but yeah, so congratulations for all that work. I thought I might just quickly firstly mention a sort of a specific project that we are involved in with Rabobank. So it's on regenerative agriculture. Rabobank's the world's largest agricultural bank. And so banks currently don't have adequate accounting models and measures to really appreciate and integrate the value of regenerative agricultural approaches into the way that they bank with farmers. And so we have a team that brings together regenerative agricultural experts in the university with sustainable accountants. And so they are working now with Rabobank and learning from each other to try and bridge that gap to be able to develop those models and metrics that Rabo can then use to be able to then fund regenerative agricultural practices appropriately, and then hopefully be able to scale up those approaches rather than traditional extractive approaches. More broadly, I thought I might talk a little bit to what the university has been doing. So we've just announced our latest sustainability plan, our second one, and the flagship part of that plan is that we have a target to be carbon neutral by 2025, and this includes all scope 3s, and so I think that's where we do have a little bit of a differentiation from other universities. Many other universities will include business flights, and some consider staff commuting, but yeah, all scope 3 seems to be going a stretch beyond. Now we are. And this sort of gets to the multi-stakeholder environment is that there needs to be a governance mechanism, and so we will be carbon neutral certified by Climate Active, which is the Australian government's body that certifies carbon neutrality, and this effectively competes in the market with the Science Based Targets Initiative, and they are quite different in terms of their approach to offsetting. So Science Based Targets Initiative, I'm sure many will know, is quite strict in terms of minimal offsetting. Climate Active is the other end of the spectrum here, and therefore is certainly open to criticism. I do think that there are advantages in getting organisations involved and in the tent. There are, when you go through the list of Australian companies that have signed up to carbon neutral and therefore are buying offsets already, there's some remarkable, fossil fuel producers that are listed there. Oftentimes, typically only, their scope 1 and 2s, and I'm sure many people will know that it's their scope 3s that are sometimes 95% of their emissions. And so offsetting is an issue in Australia. We the head of the body that certifies offsets came out about a month ago and said that 80% of offsets are a sham. So this creates obviously a real problem for a whole ecosystem that's trying to encourage corporations to along the transition pathway. So therefore, at the university as well, we need to now reflect on, well, what are we going to do in response to this announcement? We need to be going down a pathway of developing principles on what are high integrity offsets. Oxford University already have their set of principles, so we can start with them and see what to what extent they are fit for purpose. So in the multi-stakeholder nature of PRME, I encourage other universities also to sort of have a look at those Oxford principles, and maybe they can sort of be broadened. Maybe we can think about them as a PRME network. I want to mention also, so one of our next projects now, given that we have committed to all scope 3, so all the embedded emissions in our supply chain partnerships, so everything that we buy in, we spend $1.2 billion on goods and services at the university each year. That doesn't include our construction budget. So there is enormous impact, negative and positive, that we have through our procurement. We have to go through a process of instituting a shadow pricing mechanism so that our procurement officers can integrate that information, even if we're not sort of paying it. Australia doesn't have a sort of a formal government mandated carbon price at the moment. So it's, we have to sort of set up an alternative shadow system. And what this means is that then we need to be requesting that carbon information from all the suppliers that we have, which I can't remember now, but yeah, it's obviously in the many thousands. So it's so it's an enormous undertaking. But as a large organization, we do have some power to lean on, suppliers to be able to provide that information. So that information needs to be, channeled all the way through supply chains. The last point I did want to make, just in terms of sort of the broader interlinkages within the economy, is in terms of scope 3. Scope 3 is, it's not just the emissions that you buy in, but it's also what your customers do with your products. And so from a university perspective, teaching and research are our products. And so our customers, from using that sort of terminology, are our students and those using our research. So this puts a responsibility on us to consider what our students, our graduates, are going out and doing with the product that they've purchased from us. So to what extent is the education we're providing contributing then to the emissions that they might be having some influence over through their careers? Now, of course, there's, that's impossible to measure and highly nebulous, but nevertheless, we know it's something, and we know in aggregate it's enormous, right? And so this then provides a responsibility for us, I think, at the gate, when they are graduated, that they have a sufficient understanding of the climate situation such that they can go into their careers and influence their organizations to decarbonize. And of course, there will be some who are specialists who know how to do that, but the vast majority of our graduates are not. The dentists and the nurses, etc. But nevertheless, they need to have sufficient understanding so that they can, vote for decarbonizing if somebody else brings it up, in sort of around the management table. So yes, I'll leave it there, Wasim.
Thank you, Ben. I really like your answer because it highlights the complexity of what we mean by collaboration. It's not simply just partnering with another organization, but there's actually multiple different levels to collaboration, right? There's working within the bounds of government regulation, working within your organization, all the way down to, as professors, what are we teaching our students and what do they take, into the future, and how are they going to influence the next steps, or the sort of the next level of climate change and climate action. And I especially love the idea of collaborating between universities and learning from that's exactly what we're trying to do here today. PD, same question. What are you and your institution doing? What forms of collaborations are you doing to engage climate change?
So we are doing a couple of things, and I want to separate them out into two areas. The first is on the academic front, the kind of work that we've done to really look at sustainability in a more meaningful manner. We have organized, one of the things we realize is that there's not enough institutional capacity in the country to actually deal with sustainability challenges. And if you focus in on climate, the institutional capacity in business schools is even lower. So one of the things we did was we created a collaborative learning experience using a MOOC format. We invited business school teachers from across the country to join on approximately a 4-month journey to understand aspects of sustainability broadly, climate change specifically, but it was only one part of it. engage, collaborate, learn together, share resources, and also develop joint research projects together. So that was one of the initiatives we did. I can share more details on that separately. The other thing we are currently doing is we have a Center for Incubation, which is now looking at sustainable entrepreneurship more as a kind of complement of social entrepreneurship very intensively, and we are trying to work with and mentor young entrepreneurs who are interested in looking at sustainability issues, and many of them actually involve climate matters. The third, I think, is also what one might say as the regular things that you would expect in a schools, courses on climate policies, uh, or on sustainability, and integrating some of these topics into our own core curriculum. And we are in the process of redesigning our curriculum to incorporate some of these into even conventional courses. I think the final thing in academics we did was we collaborated with one of India's well-known companies, Wipro, to provide fellowships to students working in the area of sustainability, um, including climate change, to doctoral students. The idea was to kind of look at problems that are relevant to the industry, but more in an academic perspective, and then try and bring a greater collaboration between industry and academia. In fact, a lot of the initiatives that we have are really in collaborating with the industry, recognizing that it's not possible for academics to remain in ivory towers and suggest solutions. So that's one part of it. Very briefly, I want to talk to you also about the infrastructure things that we do, and that's very recent for us because our our existing campus is quite old. We have reasonably retrofitted systems to improve our climate and water performance. But on the other hand, we are now developing a greenfield campus at about 30 kilometers from where we are located currently. And one of the two key things that we actually insisted while designing this campus was one, it would be Griha standard. Griha is the equivalent of LEED, the highest level of Griha rating. And then, of course, it will be, to the extent possible, a net zero campus. So that's very interesting because then we actually introduced three elements there, which is basically to look at, of course, high performance buildings. But even within high performance buildings, how do we look at a number of things I could mention, but very briefly, let me say energy efficient lighting, efficient air conditioning, actually using geothermal space cooling and heating, radiant cooling, photovoltaic panels, in fact, renewable energy to meet at least a third of the campus's energy requirements. Overall, uh, ensuring that we don't really use energy intensive materials and at the same time also limit the use of air conditioning and so on. So that's one part of the thing. Because it's a new campus, we could also do site planning, and we could also try and create a regenerative design. By that, what I mean is it's full waste recovery. In fact, we looked at it as three different elements, and I'm going to stop with that. There's a natural habitat which needs to coexist with the built environment, and which we are trying to integrate. And of course, then there is, of course, the blue water resources. The region we are in is in a water scarce area, so we try to integrate all of that together. I could talk about it if there is time, but the point is that when we are designing a new campus, we brought sustainability to the forefront of our design requirements, and we are pushing it to the maximum extent possible. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, PD. There were two things that you brought up that really jumped out at me, and especially the first point about social entrepreneurship, because that's my area of expertise. So that's obviously what I'm most interested in. But you mentioned something really important, which was integrating sustainability not into just sustainability courses, but into the general courses, the courses that aren't about sustainability, but they can have a component of their course. And bringing in industry to show how that happens, I think is really important, because then that really, expands the idea of collaboration, right? You're thinking about industries, you're thinking about fields of study that you normally wouldn't include. And then, you know, walking the walk with your own building, your own construction, and showing the students that we're actually doing it. We're now, I'm going to ask the final question, which is actually the question I've been looking most forward to. I'm going to ask it to Thanyaporn first. Which existing practices on climate collaboration can be considered best practices?
We may not have the best of the best yet, but as current practice we have done, the UN Global Compact has set up the direction to power and empower business as a force for good. And it started 20 years ago to recognize business have the contribute significantly to create, intensify most of the world major problems like the climate change, biodiversity loss, air, water pollution, inequality, and violation on human rights. Since 20 years, it's still a problem now, even more problem today. At the same time, business possesses the resource and capability to help solve the problem in business. For example, in Thailand, I just have a report this year about the partnership as a practice, the local network. We contribute together about 100 companies on the carbon emission reduction. We deliver 7 million tons eliminated, reduced, and that's about 2% of national greenhouse gas emission. And we now together, we are looking forward with PRAM has an important leadership role to play. You can also consider that certainly we are the partner to drive the rapid progress of sustainability by business school. No matter in the future, the business size or business sector, we need to have a good mindset at the beginning. Global Compact, the network across the world, we have 10 principles to drive in the 4 areas. The first one is human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. The practice we have done currently about the company, for example, oil and gas, which is the most important, the pathway to net zero on greenhouse gas emission. We enable majority of the oil and gas company in the country to announce, declare the carbon neutrality target. And we even lead that target to the national level with the Prime Minister to have a country, Thailand, and also we adopt to other countries to pledge for the net zero. And we hope some years, we pledge now about 2065 to come sooner to be a net zero carbon business and also the country nationwide. Now, since it's running out of the time, I would like to leave some of the good questions what we normally practice to ask the business people. There are 5 questions that we are foster collaboration. The first one is about synergy and trade-off between the climate change and biodiversity conversation together with business people. We need to have a discussion about why it is important to treat them in the integrated way with the business. Second question is about why should the business care about biology, care about biodiversity. And for example, when we have plastic leakage, which is harm to the marine ecosystem and also is turn harm to our human. So we need to ask each business why they should care about it. And the third question we always ask is about how are you leaders ensuring that the biodiversity preservation in your supply chain are traceable. We need to ensure the 100% traceability of what you are doing. And the fourth question about business care of investing more money in nature. And how does biodiversity help economy in your business function? It's not easy question and it's not easy to answer, but we keep asking. And the last question is about climate urgency. We know that a lot of carbon credit has been discussed. Will the carbon market take off this time? And how do you envision the future? So that's going to be a same question asked to the business student. I think so.
Thank you. And I really like the question of why should they care? I mean, that's a question I ask my students all the time. And it's, you know, we obviously, all of us agree that it's an issue, but business is not necessarily an agreement. So we have to ask them, why should they care? Paulo, same question. What existing practices on climate collaboration can be considered best practices?
I think that the best practice that we can do in collaboration is that to have agreement with every time that we do something, we have to do agreement, but we have to share everything that we do with any kind of people, any kind of institution. And I think that another thing that is an open source that as I told you at the beginning. And another thing is that really, really, really important that we speak with people with different skills. The best thing that we can do to change everything is that we merge the skills with different people. For instance, every time I tell my students that are biologists, please don't speak with other biologists, but speak with psychologists, with other people, with doctors, with any kind of people, but don't speak with biologists if you want to change the world. This is just something that I think is important.
Yes, thank you. That's actually really, really good advice, and something I think students are uniquely able to do, because they just go walk across campus, go to the next building, where in industry it may not always be like that. Finally, Ben, what are some best practices?
So yeah, you asked about climate best practices, but I'm actually going to come from left field a little bit and just talk about a best practice, I think, in modern slavery, or at least an example of collaboration that I think that should be inspiring to us within the PRME network as universities who can collaborate. So in the Australian university sector, the Australian Universities Procurement Network, so there are 39 universities, and the heads of the procurement departments in each of those universities, they get together all the time, and so they agreed to collaborate on modern slavery. And so we have modern slavery legislation in Australia where we have to report on what we're doing, what sort of due diligence we're doing, which is can be enormous in terms of the resources that are necessary to go through to understand all that information, all that data, to go through the multiple tiers. Ultimately, you want to be going to the end of the supply chains, and that's just so much work. But if you can collaborate and share the work, then it's going to be so much more effective. Now, other industries in Australia have talked about doing that previously, and especially the construction industry is perhaps one of the most progressive in Australia, but they just couldn't come to any agreement on sharing data because essentially they're competitive, and their supply chains are part of their competitive advantage. So they weren't able to do that sharing. Whereas universities, while we are somewhat competitive, we are for-purpose organizations, and we are able to get over those boundaries of competition to be able to collaborate. And so the Australian Universities Procurement Network, they bought a white label sort of tech platform. It's called Freedom, FRDM, which scrapes data from across the internet about different sort of modern slavery, information scandals, etc., that might be available. You put in your what you buy, and then that information will be filtered in and put red flags around particular products that you might buy from particular suppliers. So it's a very effective and efficient way of sharing the burden of that information gathering, that due diligence. So I hope that can be a bit of a model that we can sort of look to climate and to other sorts of issues that we might be able to tackle together.
Absolutely, and I think that's you bring up a really important point about the data sharing versus the sort of protectionism that a lot of companies have. It reminded me of a concept I came across a few years ago called collaborative advantage. Rather than competitive advantage, collaborative. So if finding ways to create advantages when we actually work together and we share information. And I think that's a very strong role that universities can play, because we can produce information, we can collect and maintain secrecy if needed, but still disseminate. With that, we come to the end of our panel. I want to thank everybody. This panel reminded me of my college days. I've been sitting here taking notes vigorously on everything that was said. So thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I'm going to toss it back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.